Hello, I'm Thomas Hare, Chief Content Officer of the Performance Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world speaking about the hottest topics in the industry are scheduled twice a month. Before we get to today's conversation, one housekeeping note. We will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you do not have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type and send your question in. We'll be collecting them and we'll try to get to as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. As demographics continue to shift, brands and marketers are looking to maximize their opportunities to reach the booming U.S. Hispanic market. One area of spend growth, cross-language media availability. In recent years, Spanish language ads have grown on English language media outlets, and more recently, some Spanish language outlets have started to open their doors to buys with English language creative. I can't speak either English or Spanish currently, apparently. I'm struggling here. We go. What do these shifts mean? Who's gaining and who's not? And what's next? Today, Take 20 host and PDMI Brand Response Council Chair Chris Foster of Modern Postcard welcomes experts from both the buy and sell sides, DDH partners Marcelino Miyares and TelevisaUnivision's Kyle Patten for a conversation. Miyares serves as PDMI U.S. Hispanic Council Chair, and Patten has been a member of the council since its formation 4 years ago. Welcome, gentlemen. We look forward to your conversation. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas, and welcome in, gents. Very excited about this conversation. So just to kind of play off of what Tom mentioned earlier, it's an understatement to say that the U.S. Latino or Hispanic market is strong. In 2020, if the U.S. Latino market was its own country, it would be the 8th largest economy in the world and the largest Latino market in the world. It's larger than Brazil and more than twice the size of Mexico. When compared to the non-Latino U.S. cohort, the Latino cohort grew 4.5 times faster in terms of GDP. According to the Pew Research Center, since 1970, when Hispanics made up 5% of the U.S. population and numbered 9.6 million, the Hispanic population has grown more than sixfold. As of the 2020 census, 19% of the U.S. population at over 62 million strong. So clearly for businesses in the performance marketing space, the sheer volume of opportunity isn't just what's happening now, but what's going to happen as the demographics show even more market opportunity in the future. So we're excited to talk about this topic. And, as Thomas said, Spanish language ads on English speaking outlets or English language ads on Spanish speaking outlets present both benefits and challenges, and honestly, probably more questions than answers at this point. So Marcelino, I'll start with you, if you don't mind. Are brands and agencies truly, fully seeing the massive potential with this market?
I don't think so. In fact, absolutely not. If you look at just straight investment in the market versus what would be prorated share of budget, if you looked at it just at a demographic perspective, we're way under. We're probably 7-8% of total budgets. Kyle, you probably have better information, but we're probably in the 7-8% of total budgets targeting Hispanic versus, like you said, the 19 to low 20s. And depending on the demographic, if you look at just Gen Z, it's 25% of the market. So, so I think absolutely not. And a huge contributor to that is that there's some real serious blind spots that are going to get even bigger over the next handful of years because of the way that our market, the way that the media marketplace is changing to streaming and how we deliver messages, et cetera. And those blind spot, the main blind spot in my mind is how much traffic is the Hispanic market, how much business is the Hispanic market doing on English language sites. And even at retail in general, retailers have a better handle of it, I think, than digital players. But how much are we delivering to English? That becomes a blind spot because there's no way to attribute it, or there are few ways to attribute it back to in language or in culture spends. And I think we're all kind of struggling with that. But how much business is being done on clients' e-commerce English language platforms? And then even more black hole or black box is what's happening on Amazon and what's happening on Walmart.com and what's happening on some of these bigger players. So I think are we definitely tapping the potential? Absolutely not. And a huge part of that has to do with I think the biggest part of it has to do with facing the truth, from my perspective, on where the attribution is. How much business are we generating in English, and where is credit being given on a ROAS or an ROI or an MER, however you want to look at it, basis.
That's a great answer, very honest answer. I appreciate that. And I guess, Kyle, I guess I'll turn to you with this. As it relates to the cross-language ads, what kind of mix are you seeing across the entire vast network of TelevisaUnivision?
I would say, 5 years ago, it was almost minimal, but the last 5 years, we've definitely seen an increase in English language creative running on our networks. I want to say, anywhere from 10 to 15% right now. I think you have certain categories that are less. I think CPG and retail are down, but we've seen a big shift, especially with pharma and financial, but also some of our DTC brands. They're kind of dipping their toe, starting with an English spot. It might be a 15 or 30-second creative because it's easier, I should say, and it's much more effective than a 120. But we've seen definitely a shift. We've seen advertisers grow, starting with English language spots. So to Marce's point, yeah, like it is kind of underserved, but we've seen a dramatic shift in more advertisers actually testing the English first.
Interesting. I guess for you, I was talking about it, Marcelino, what is your take on the cross-language ads? Are they more effective? Do you see there's a difference between is there a difference, I should say, between a culturally appropriate ad versus a language correct ad? Is that a thing that you guys discuss?
Yeah, but I think it's in culture and in language, they're related. You can be in culture with no Spanish, right, and still be authentic. You can also be in language and be completely unauthentic. So I think it kind of depends who you decide you're talking to. I mean, as a professional in this space, but also as a first generation Hispanic, our audience is on a spectrum. You have the most assimilated all the way to, and still, last name Gonzalez or Hernandez, and might still live in East LA or in Spanish Harlem or wherever, or Miami. And then you have, the most unacculturated, right? And it's sort of like a Venn diagram today. I think there's a lot of overlap, right? And I think, it's no surprise to me that Univision and Telemundo are allowing English language advertising, because there are Hispanics on that spectrum who, may live and breathe 40, 50, 60% in Spanish, but they operate perfectly well in the general market environment. And, that other 40% might include entertainment use in either language. So I think, it's culturally, the issue of cultural appropriateness depends on who you're talking to. We're on that spectrum of hyphenicity, we call it at the agency. We're on that spectrum of hyphenicity. Where do you identify on that spectrum? And what you watch is the nexus of what determines how much language and authentic you need to be, or how in culture and authentic you need to be. What's important is that you're authentic, that it relates somehow, that it's relevant to our market in some way. A Spanish language infomercial, we're against the grain of our industry. Sorry to take too much time, but our agency takes the position that we would like to work with English language control infomercials and short form commercials and adapt those into Spanish, actually dub them into Spanish, right? We like that first because we know that the model works, that the marketing model and the messaging model works. And then we figure out how to make it more and more authentic. So if I have a spot that's, 90 seconds of somebody playing golf, I'm not gonna, it's not so relevant to my market. If they're boxing, if they're playing baseball or basketball or something, a little bit closer. So I think it just depends on who you're talking to.
Well, speaking of who you're talking to, Kyle, I guess I'll ask you, you offer so many different kinds of media on your platform. Are there channels that you're seeing that are more effective than others in being a Spanish language ad? You'd mentioned the 15 to 30 second English, which works pretty well, but across digital, across broadcast, across CTV, across video, display ads, where do you see these channels? That are there any channels that you see kind of lifting up where the language makes a difference?
Well, digitally is definitely, I want to say, the preferred outlet, especially for English language creative. We tend to kind of target more bilingual audiences there.
Okay.
We have certain tent poles, and soccer, which tend to be more bilingual. But I really think it depends on like how effective the actual spot is, and within Spanish language. And kind of see, you want to say how receptive, Hispanic is, over 70% of Hispanics don't mind actually seeing an English language ad. And why? Because 80% of Hispanics actually speak English. So I think that's where you kind of see the growth. But I mean, we've seen, I think really depends, back to what Mars was saying, really depends on your platform and where you're seeing the growth. Like, especially on our digital platform, it's much younger. And so that's where we're seeing more of the kind of English language spots, and they're being more receptive to them.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me, especially when Generation Z is coming up. That new generation, like Marcia said, 25% is Hispanic Latino, and the Gen Z is actually going to be the most diverse, and is the most diverse population group in the entire country. In fact, it's the first population group where whites are not the majority per se, right? So it's going to be an interesting mix as this generation comes in and their own behaviors start to become even more manifest within the market space. And I guess maybe, Marcelino, as a younger Hispanic, consumers engage with media, how do you address some of the blurring of the languages, the mixing and matching? Is that something that you're thinking about?
Well, I think if there's a space on the planet where where Spanish language is evolving at the fastest pace, it's the United States. Because we have people coming from 20 plus countries who are interacting in a marketplace of 200 different cultures. And depending on where you live and who you interact with, Spanish is going to evolve here, and that's a huge dilemma in our business. How true should we stay to the Spanish language, the Academy of the Spanish Language Dictionary, right? Versus what's really happening on the street. I think Gen Z is probably going to be the most retro acculturating segment of the market that we've seen in a long time, and by that I mean that they're adopting, they're taking pride in their identity as a Hispanic, as a Latino, as a Cuban, a Mexican, however it is that they want to define themselves, and that's going to have an impact on the language in some ways, or in a lot of ways. I think the answer to your question is the language line is blurring, right? And this generation is accepting. This new generation is going to understand that speaking two languages, being fluent in two cultures, is better than just one. From an economic perspective, from a professional perspective, from a personal perspective, from a relationship perspective, we're seeing more, mixed marriages, meaning Hispanic to non-Hispanic, than we've ever seen. So I think that line is blurring, and the media is a little bit ahead of the curve on that, in the sense that you can watch commercials in both languages. You also see a lot of languages that have Spanglish. Some bad attempts, some natural and authentic attempts. You're seeing the full spectrum, because that's the reality of the market.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that. I think I remember, I don't think I was dreaming this. I think I remember watching a program recently where it's a family interaction and they're speaking English, blah, 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 and then they move into Spanish and there's an entire conversation in Spanish, but there were no subtitles. I thought that was such an interesting thing, because I'm like, that's just natural. That's just how families interact. And I remember going to friends' houses, and friends, my daughters would have friends in Hispanic neighborhoods here in San Diego, right, where they would just go back and forth between English and Spanish just naturally, in one word to the next and one sentence to the next. And I'm curious, as with this new generation, as that might be played out in the performance marketing and in the advertising. So I guess, we've got some big thought ideas that I would ask the both of you. Kyle, I'll ask you first. So we had this terrific Take 20 scheduled for today. It's Wednesday, July 12th, 2023. And it's about the in-language and culture Hispanic market. If we have this same Take 20 18 months from now, how is that Take 20 going to be different from what we're talking about than this one?
I think that's, Chris, great question. I remember we did a Take 20 about 18 months ago, almost right around this time, talking about the streaming wars. And now you're seeing the landscape change so much. But I think as far as your question, I think you're going to see more advertisers definitely in English or running in Spanish, and then but also contracting in English to an English website. I think you're going to have more advertising because our marketplace is growing so much. It has so much so much influential value to it. You're going to see more and more advertisers. I'm not saying more dollars, but I'm saying more DTC brands, more retail, CPG, financial, pharma, all kind of dipping their toe in. And I think it's going to kind of keep growing. I think, our economy right now, while it is, somewhat strong, I think, our market's kind of flattish a little bit, but I could see a big surge at the end of, right in fourth quarter and 2024 and beyond. I think, the election has a lot of different weighing on, also interest rates and spending. I think there's so many different variables on it, but as far as our marketplace, I think it's very strong and it's only going to keep growing.
Mars?
Yeah, and I think that streaming brings an A/B testing capability to digital that digital doesn't have, right? Because the streaming, you're able to identify an IP address and get a sense of how much viewing time is going to either language. And we can now target ads accordingly.
That's cool.
It's not something you could do so easily on digital, right? On pure, non-video, non-TV screen digital. So I think our market unfortunately evolves a lot slower than Kyle and I would like in terms of new advertisers and more money. But I think for sure we're going to see a lot more of those English language players right now on Univision or on Telemundo say, what if I did the same exact ad in Spanish? What would happen? So English is sort of an easy bridge to which we welcome, even though they take up valuable inventory for us Spanish advertisers. But I welcome more clients coming in. It would be really cool if these same clients didn't rest their laurels on, Univision, Telemundo, they take English, I don't really need to do much else. No, let's take it a step further. What happens if we do same concept, same message in Spanish, and we're going to start showing what we already know. That if you're speaking to the heart of the consumer, not just the mind, you're going to perform better.
Yeah, and what's interesting,
I was going to say, Chris, Mars brought up a good point. I don't want to forget this because I just thought about it. I think as you're seeing more English language ratings erosion and less performance, on the English side, I think you're going to see more of a shift, especially, to the digital side. I mean, we've seen huge growth, especially with our platform on VIX, and that's where we've seen the biggest growth, especially this year. And I think that's going to continue as the ratings kind of erosion kind of continue to happen on the English language. I think we're going to see that shift to Spanish language, but also to the digital side as well.
I love that contrast, right? Because, as we know, world and markets ebb and flow and they move around, nothing stays the same. But that idea of a combination of English language erosion with the phrase that you mentioned, Mars, about the retro-adoptive culture, I really think that's interesting because these things kind of, along with the growth of the Gen Z and their native adoption of digital technologies and CTV and, just all things streaming, right? It's like this confluence of events. On top of that is the Gen Z predilection to lean into identity, whatever that is for them, right? It's such an important piece of the brands that they choose that I think that it could be a really interesting opening for brands to figure out how I actually authentically reach this Gen Z Hispanic audience in these digital formats. And then maybe finally it goes from 7 to 8% to its true 15, 16, 20% of budget. as it should be. Very curious. So I guess book your calendars. January 14th, 2024. Is that when we're doing this again, guys? Or
25.
we have to 2025 to bring it back. All right. Well, this is fantastic. It's already past 20 minutes. Tom, John, do we have questions from our audience?
Yeah, we have a few, some of them directed to a specific person, but the first one is, I think it's just asking the group for ballpark estimates, your best guess. At present time, what percentage of advertising time on primary Spanish outlets is in English?
That's going to be a Kyle question.
Yeah, still relatively small, in the 10-15% range. But like I said, 5 years ago, it was probably 0. So I think it's only going to kind of keep increasing.
You didn't take English.
I wasn't even here 12 years ago, so I
think it's a relatively new phenomenon, but I would have put it at 10-15%.
I would say 90-10 for linear. Streaming is about 20%, maybe even and climbing.
Yeah, great. Marce, is there a demand by marketers and brands among your clients to run successful Spanish campaigns on English stations?
Up until now, there hasn't. And we've taken, not that we haven't tried, we refer to Spanish language and then we refer to in culture. But the way that agency assignments are assigned, we're kind of siloed into the Spanish language world, which is fine. I mean, that's our specialty. We don't get that kind of pressure. We're putting, as we move into streaming and digital as an agency, we're putting pressure on clients to say there are English preferring Hispanics out there that we need to reach, and that may be vulnerable as consumers to Spanish language ads or in culture ads that feature Spanish and just some authentic way to catch their attention. So that's coming, but right now, no pressure.
Yeah. Another one for you, Marce. Obviously, there's a ton of buzz, and there's so much drive towards CTV and streaming in just the English language media marketplace. Your clients, what are they looking to get into these days? Are they trying to push you guys into more of the streaming CTV? Or are they sticking with linear? And what's your general advice to clients about what the best options are?
It's kind of both. I mean, we test everything. And the challenge with CTV in general is that the CPMs are too high. And we've been pushing hard with all of the major platforms to get, to create a performance tier for us, traditional DRTV advertisers, so that we keep testing and we keep trying new things. There is pressure from the clients to try to get CTV to work. But in Spanish so far, it's been challenging. And I think my agency peers would agree that we haven't found the right model for a straight DRTV ROI kind of play. From a branding D2C lead gen perspective, yeah, that's the new frontier. And that's going to be that new A/B testing frontier that I was talking about in terms of language and culture and how we target people on this spectrum, on this ethnicity spectrum.
Right. Kyle, kind of flipping that question around a little bit. I know there's a lot of English language outlets that are demanding some sort of streaming or CTV spend with their linear. Where are you guys at on that?
Well, I mean, our market's been very good from both the linear and a digital side, but when we can get both cross-platform, with both linear and digital, that's where our clients have kind of seen the most success from what we've seen. And as our scale keeps growing, we're at 12 million. We're at 12 million subs per. So I mean, we're seeing growth there. We're 30 million uniques. So that's where we've seen the growth, and it's the more scale we get, it's the more supply, more capacity that we have, and that we can kind of give more of a friendly CPM for clients to test, and that if it does well, then it can be a 52-week advertiser. So that's what's helped us, is the growth of our streaming product, which has helped us tremendously.
Yeah, great. And the last one here is for Kyle. Scale of 1 to 10. What's the pressure level from agencies to get English language creative on your outlets?
I would say 4 to 5. 4 to 5. Usually, usually they would ask first do you take English language? And to Marcy's point, 5 years ago, we would say absolutely not. It's starting to be a little more lenient. So, I mean, it's still, it's not, I would say pressure, but it's usually the first question they ask.
Great. We'll rejoin you here. Thank you both Marcelino and Kyle. Obviously, thank you as always, Chris, for your wisdom and expertise in hosting this group. We appreciate all the attendees for joining us today as well. Our next episode of Take 20 is Wednesday, July 26th, and we'll dive into the effective use of data spines and data graphs and performance campaigns. Please visit thepdmi.com/take-20 to register for the webinar and check out the upcoming schedule. Finally, a reminder that the PDMI West is coming quicker than you expect, October 9th through 11th at Intercontinental San Diego. That's right, 3 months from today, we'll be done with that show. So it's coming in a hurry. Lock in and get your badge today. And a reminder, badge holders also get the opportunity to book their rooms at our discounted block at the Intercontinental. Visit the PDMI.com/PDMI-West for more info and to grab your badge today. Thanks again for checking out this episode of the PDMI's Take 20. Be well. We're wishing you a nice day wherever you may be. Take care. Bye-bye.